Now, we want to talk about in the documents, in the evidence. Dan, if you go to the university and you're talking to students right now that are listening and saying, I'd like to know about Jesus, in the evidence that we have, the historical evidence, where would you advise them to start to get a glimpse of who Jesus claimed he was?
I'd have them start with the Gospel of Mark. And certainly they have to start with the Gospel, but if they start with the Gospel of Mark, then they're dealing with a document that both sides of the theological aisle would agree is probably the most primitive gospel. And even here, you strip all the layers of theological accretions that are assumed to take place in Matthew, Luke, and John. You get down to Mark, and you're down to the closest core we can get. And even here, you see important glimpses of Jesus being seen as God. One of my favorite texts that suggests this, in fact, there's three that I'd like to link if I could. Mark 2:5. Jesus is in Peter's house, and they're ripping off the tiles, or not the tiles, but the roof, so that four men are bringing a paralytic inside because they can't get through the door. The place is all filled up. And so they drop this man down gently, and then Jesus says to him, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And they go, "What?" I mean, this guy didn't come to have his sins forgiven. He came so he could walk. And so you get these religious leaders who are sitting there, and they start muttering to themselves, "He's blaspheming. Only God can forgive sins." Half of what they said was true. That is, only God can forgive sins, but the other half is not true. And so then Jesus responds to what they are murmuring to themselves. He says, "To show you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," and then he commands the man to walk. Now what you see here is Jesus is appropriating the actions that only God can do, which is to forgive sins. And so when he says the Son of Man has authority to do this, he's saying something about himself that could only be said of God. Now these religious leaders understand it, but the disciples don't. And the reason the religious leaders understand who Jesus is claiming to be is because they don't have any loyalty to him at all. They have loyalty to the Jewish code, and consequently they read the Shema every day. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And when Jesus is forgiving sins, he is claiming that he's functioning in the capacity as God. Now the disciples, on the other hand, who are not theologically trained, but they are loyal to Jesus and they're loyal Jews, now they just have a big question mark over who Jesus really is. They know he's a good guy. They know he's a prophet. They know he can heal people. They've just seen this. They know that he can cast out demons, but they still don't have a category for them. 2 chapters later, we get to the end of Mark's Gospel, or Mark chapter 4, and here Jesus had just stilled the storm. And he does it with 2 words: quiet, shut up, that's it. He doesn't say, "I command you in the name of God," or anything like this. He just quiets the storm down. And instantly it goes still. In verse 41, the disciples say, "Who is this guy who can still the storm?" So still they've got no category for him yet. They're loyal to him, but they don't know to whom they're loyal. Then you go later into Mark chapter 8, and you see the healing of the blind man where Jesus has to spit in his face. It's a remarkably repulsive story that I hope we can get to in a later show. But after that, and after the confession of Jesus as the Messiah by Peter, and the disciples don't have a clue what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah, to die on a cross, and to be raised from the dead. They don't have a category for that yet. Then you get to Mark chapter 9, verse 10, where after the transfiguration, where Jesus is with 3 of his disciples, and they come down from the mountain, and he says, "Now, don't tell anybody about this until after my resurrection." And then the next verse says, Mark 9:10, "And they began to debate with one another what the resurrection might mean." What all this points to is this is genuine historical material for the disciples not to have a clue about Jesus being raised in human history rather than raised from the dead at the end of time as what Judaism did teach. This is a remarkable thing. They didn't have a category for that yet. And that shows us that they could not have invented that doctrine right after the crucifixion. They couldn't have come up with this. This had to be something that Jesus taught them because they didn't understand it. And only when he's raised from the dead, they say, "Oh, you really did mean a physical resurrection from the dead."